Most med spas fail because they grow faster than their finances can handle. Welcome back to the Business of Aesthetics podcast. I'm your host, Don Adeesha. And to help us rethink how financial systems actually drive successful expansion, we're joined by Chelsea Zainea. Chelsea is a virtual CFO and medical spa profitability expert who works with growing practices to build structure, clarity, and strategy to their financial decisions. She specializes in helping owners move beyond basic bookkeeping and build the financial infrastructure required to scale with confidence. Today, we are going to be discussing financial infrastructure. We are talking about profitability and how to make smarter scaling decisions without putting your business at risk. This episode is brought to you by Equimarketing, the digital growth partner behind this podcast, and a trusted resource for aesthetic practices looking to dominate their local markets. With that being said, Chelsea, welcome to the Business of Aesthetics podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Don. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. Now, Chelsea, when you step into a med spa that looks successful on the surface, what is the first financial signal you look at to determine if the business is actually healthy or quietly struggling?
Yeah, and this is so important because there are so many med spas or wellness practices that look really healthy from the surface. Their revenues are look great, and they may even be profitable. What I'm looking for is cash flow. So I will start by looking at their cash flow for the last 3 months and then the past 12 months. And what I'm looking for is, are they generating enough revenues that they're covering their operational expenses, or are they using debt to supplement? And then from there, I want to know how long that's been going on, because for me, that's telling me, okay, is this more of an operational problem? There's a deeper level here, or are we just a little bit disorganized and we need some financial systems in place?
Okay. Now, tell me a little bit more about that. How much of a ratio is good, like when it comes to the cash flow, when it comes to covering the operational expenses? What's the healthy ratio you're looking for?
It's not so much a ratio as far
Okay.
as, like, if we're bringing in net profit, I don't want any more than 50% of your net profit going towards debt payments. So that's one of the key indicators that I'm looking for. And are we building cash every single month? Or are we running out of money and then turning around and using debt to supplement to make sure that we can cover our operations?
So, when it comes to vanity metrics per se, are
Mhm.
there any specific ones that owners often brag about that actually hide deep financial trouble?
Obviously, revenues, and that's one of the things. And the faster that practices scale, usually the worse it actually is. So, for example, I right at the beginning of the year, we had a big cleanup for somebody that's wanting to exit. They're trying to exit, and so they want their financials looking really good. Well, when we look at that, the revenues look great, and over the past year, they doubled in revenues, and they're even showing an operating profit. But then when we flip over to the balance sheet, they're very low on cash. The proportion of cash to sales. And again, if you're looking for a healthy ratio of cash reserves, I always want to see at least 10% of gross revenues in cash reserves. And that tells me that a client has enough money that one slow month isn't going to do anything to them. They're able to support themselves. They're not going to, you know, end up in a bunch of debt. But when we look at that balance
And
sheet, if we see low cash and then we see a bunch of debt, we know there's a problem there, that their operations aren't truly profitable. They're using debt to purchase things. And that may be assets, because a lot of them, when they're expanding in the beginning, they're buying a bunch of devices, medical equipment, or they're doing a bunch of leasehold improvements. And so you don't see that on the profit and loss statement. That's over on the balance sheet. So that's what I'm looking for. Are we sustaining the practice with cash, or are we using a bunch of debt to get there?
how often should an owner be checking this, their cash flow? Is it daily, weekly, monthly to catch this downward trend before it's too
Yeah.
late?
I train my clients weekly because they're busy, right? They're managing a practice. Oftentimes they're a provider in the practice. So they don't have a ton of time to be monitoring this. And it takes your mental bandwidth. It's anxiety inducing when you're constantly watching your bank account. And so I train my clients to do it in 30 minutes or less once a week. And what we're looking for is to build that cash flow up enough that we've got enough of a safety net in there that nothing's going to bounce. We don't need to be worrying about it on a daily basis.
Okay. And now, how do you practically build a forecasting system inside a growing practice that allows an owner to make confident hiring or expansion decisions instead of relying on gut instinct?
Yeah, Don. And this is so important because if you think of a forecast like GPS, for example, if I got in my car today, I'm in Central Ohio. Let's say I get in my car today and I want to drive to California. Knowing me, I won't even make it without a GPS. I have no sense of direction. So your forecast is like your GPS, right? We need to put numbers to all of your plans. So a good
Hmm.
starting place when you're first building a monthly forecast, this is your bird's eye view for the year. We're building it out monthly. What's going to happen for the next 12 months? We're probably going to start with historical numbers. Like, what did last year look like? We'll start there. But then it is so important to build on that because we're forecasting. This is all future focused. We're planning here. So what is it that you want to do this year? What are you thinking so do you want to hire somebody? Is that on your radar? Are you wanting to
Hmm.
possibly purchase a new device? Are you wanting to move to a second location? What are these big things that you want to do? And then let's put numbers to all of these plans and see if they're going to work out. Because ultimately, we want to know
Okay.
what has to happen in order for a practice owner to do what they want to do. And how does that affect cash flow? At the end of the day, it's always comes back to those cash balances, right? How much cash are we going to have left at the end of the 12 months when we get through this? Are we going to have more than we had last year at this time? Are we going to have less? Do we have enough in the business? And at any point in time during the year, are we going to be in a cash crunch? That's what we're looking for with a forecast. And then practically, that leads me into a 13-week, a more granular cash flow forecast is so much more important for a practice owner. I mean, that big bird's eye view is great to look at, especially with someone like with a fractional CFO to make sure that all of your plans for the year look good from that level. But
Hmm.
things change on a day-to-day basis, right? So always having a more detailed cash flow forecast that 13 weeks out, we call that our weekly CEO planner, and that's what we use. And that's the true decision-making tool, the everyday decision-making tool that practice owners need to have in place to help them make the best decisions for their business. So that 13 weeks is much more granular and we're changing, right? Because if you get in your car, in your GPS, and it has you on a route
Hmm.
and the road's closed and you turn off, it's going to reroute for you. That's what a forecast
Hmm.
is all about. It's not static like a budget. This is changing. So we want to be updating those actual numbers and seeing like, okay, this changed. So what does the map look like now?
Okay, that's very interesting. So, can you give us a bit of a example, if you don't mind, where um, we're looking at the 13 weekly, and then we're trying to make our decisions based off of that. And like you mentioned, there might be a roadblock,
Mhm.
or maybe there might be a surplus. How are you addressing that? And how has that actually shown up? Is I'm curious to know.
Yeah, so let's say I have a business owner and they're wanting to hire a new employee, and we've made our plan for the year back in October. I like to do it 3 months before the start of the year, so we've got our plan for the year, and we thought about March we would be hiring somebody. Well, we're going to be watching that, and maybe we realize at the beginning of the year something happened and we had a really slow month, and so
Hmm.
now we don't have that cash that we thought we were going to have. So when we put those numbers in there we're now in a place we don't want to be. Our cash balance goes too low. That's going to allow
Okay.
us in the moment decide, okay, well, let's wait till April or May. Let's just postpone this decision until the investment makes sense. And then the other way is if you are looking and I have a client with this right now, is actually we're seeing
Mhm.
and it's wonderful. She's up much more than we had originally forecasted she would be at this time. So then we're looking at, okay, now we've got extra cash in the business. What does that look like for you? And if you don't have like let's say you don't need to hire anyone, everything's going great, that's extra money for the business owner, the practice owner to take out. Then they can take an owner's
Mhm.
distribution. You've got that extra cash or invest it. Whatever you want to do, you know how much extra you have, and then you're able to make that decision of okay, this is what looks best for my practice.
Okay, so your recommendation is to create a 13 weekly forecast, or is it
Mhm.
like the yearly forecast?
The 13 week is always. So you're always forecasting at least 13 weeks out. So once a week, you're getting into your forecast. We're updating your actuals and we're looking out at what do the next 3 months look like? Because that's going to allow us to see, okay, we're going to have a problem in two weeks here or 2 months here. And we need to either make sure that we generate enough revenues to cover that. We can get ahead of that problem with some marketing or
Hmm.
figure out otherwise how we're going to fix that cash flow crunch. It's helping us
So at the
day to
beginning,
day make the decisions.
I want to know, so at the beginning of the year, are you not forecasting for the whole year then? Just
Yes, you're forecasting for the whole year. That's a higher level forecast. So that's on a
okay.
monthly basis. So this is what we
Okay.
think January is going to look like. This is what we think February is going to look like. This is what we think March is going to look like. But that's at a monthly level. Throughout the
Mhm.
month, especially our newer practice owners who don't have as much cash build up, throughout the month, that cash may not be what it is at the end of the month, right? Things
Mhm.
happen throughout the month. So, on a much more granular level, we want to be forecasting weekly, day to day in our business. And that's what actually helps us make decisions on the day to day.
Amazing. So we're first looking at the historicals, then we're looking at our own goals, and then figuring out the numbers on how to get to those goals while having like this overarching map for the whole year, but at the same time having a much more granular look with this 13 week out, which is much more, I assume, is much more dynamic compared to the whole year version.
Exactly.
Of,
Yeah. The weekly is much more dynamic. You're updating that every week. Now, the monthly, we still, and for our clients, we use software called Reach Reporting. So we're still updating the annual forecast at a monthly level every single month, but we don't want to wait till we get to the end of the month to realize that we need to course correct. We want to be getting that done on a weekly basis throughout the month.
what is the exact process you identify whether adding another injector will increase profit or actually dilute the margins?
Yeah. So for me, I like to start out by looking at utilization. Are we fully utilizing the employees we've already got? And then I also like to take a look at revenue capacity based on the number of providers they have, because that can be indicative of some problems too. So I want to know based on the number of providers we have and their available hours and our average revenue per hour, this is what it looks like we should be able to generate in revenue. And then what are we actually generating? Because if those two numbers are far off, we need to investigate that first. Do we have employees that aren't as effective as other employees, right? Like check into that first. Make sure that we can't accomplish our goals with what we've already got before we decide to hire. And then if we realize, okay, our utilization's good, it's at that 80% higher, and our revenue capacity, we're right there, like we're on the verge of capacity. It's too late to hire because then you're waitlisting patients, you are overtaxing your staff. So we want to hire in time that we're not stressing our system too much, but we don't want to
Mhm.
hire if it's unnecessary because then we will see that negative impact on our margins. And then before we make that decision, again, we're going back to the forecast, we're going to put those numbers into our forecast because even if your pipeline is flowing, you've got plenty of new patients coming in, it's going to take a minute before that new employee is completely trained, they're onboarded,
Mhm.
and then their books are full. So, do we have enough cash to cover their salary in the meantime? And what does that look like? How is that going to affect our numbers?
And when you are stress testing the system, or rather, how do you determine if we are stressing the system too much? What is the revenue capacity that you feel like is a good ratio to really consider hiring a new employee?
I think that 80% is a good ratio, but you're not gonna have to look at the numbers for that. You're gonna hear about it from your employees because they're gonna be stressed out. They're gonna be running from room to room and patient to patient. You're gonna know that it's time to hire from that. We just want to make sure that it's not a scheduling problem or we have one employee that's not performing. All of those issues are worked out before we then in turn decide to make that decision, and then we map out the numbers and make sure that's all gonna work as well.
If the data shows that a current injector might be diluting the margins, what are probably the first three levers an owner should, pull to fix it?
I encourage sharing numbers with your employees. So for my clients, we set up scorecards. So I want a weekly scorecard for the business as a whole. I also want a weekly scorecard for our providers. So you are communicating their numbers to them on a weekly basis. And it's again, we're doing it weekly because we want to get ahead of it. We don't want to wait until it's already happened and then go back and have to have these really awkward conversations. Having the numbers and having this hard tool that we can use as a conversation piece is really helpful in addressing those issues. And of course, like the first four metrics that I start everybody out on is number of new clients, the sales that they're bringing in, their average invoice value, and their utilization. I also want you looking at retention for employees because that'll be the key indicator. You might be funneling patients to them, so their new client list is growing, they're constantly booked, but they're always booked with new patients. They're not retaining their clients. So if their clients aren't asking to come back to them or rebooking with them, that's usually an indication of a performance problem. And then the average invoice
Mm.
value is also an indication that they might be uncomfortable with the sales process, right? Which is clinicians are, I'm an accountant, so I get it. They're clinicians, I'm an accountant. Marketing and sales aren't our thing. Like it's uncomfortable. But in every day, you have to be able to sell things. And we want the best outcomes for our patients, right? So you need to be willing to have those conversations. And so you can see from that average invoice value, if theirs is lower than everybody else's, they're maybe uncomfortable with that. And so we need to get them the training that they need to fix that. So when you're looking at their numbers with them every single week, you're able to say, okay, how can I support you here? What do you need from me to help you reach your goals?
What is a good retention ratio, do you think, like on average,
That's
just so that
usually, yeah, more 60 to 70%. And that can be really hard to see in softwares. It's usually on the dashboard somewhere, but you really need to have an understanding of how that works in yours. It's same with utilization in your specific software, because sometimes it pulls things in that isn't exactly accurate. You want to know where that number's coming from and what you're seeing. And sometimes it's
check?
rebooking. There's just like a rebooking number, and that can be really beneficial versus looking at that retention if that looks off to you, like it's not really, it's taking into account other things or not pulling in what you feel is accurate.
Ensuring that your provider utilization as well as you're checking your revenue capacity and seeing the difference between that. Also looking to really identify earlier on if your team is under pressure.
Mhm.
And if they aren't doing that great, sharing the numbers seems to help drive the conversation in a much more productive manner.
It does. It helps drive the conversation. And you're also communicating and showing appreciation for your employees that are hitting their numbers and they're doing well. It brings you back to having those conversations, whereas sometimes we get busy in the practice and our employees see that they feel like we're taking them for granted. We're not. It's not on our mind all the time. So having a designated time and a designated tool to help you is really beneficial in both rewarding the employees that are doing well and helping course correct those employees that need further training or whatever that the case may be.
Now, before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor, Equimarketing. If you're a practice owner looking to attract more high value patients, Equa is offering Business of Aesthetics listeners a complimentary marketing strategy meeting. This is a personalized session built around your practice. Their team spends 4 to 5 hours researching your online presence, your competition, and your biggest growth opportunities before the meeting. So you walk away with a tailored plan and not just generic advice. On the call, they'll show you how to improve visibility, increase qualified patient inquiries, and build a clearer path to measurable growth. There are only a limited number of spots available each month. To reserve your session, visit businessofesthetics.org/MSM. That's businessofesthetics.org/MSM. Now, let's get back into our conversation. Chelsea, how should an owner structure their cash flow management so that growth doesn't create constant financial pressure or instability?
Yeah. Yeah. So some business owners come to me and they have a super overcomplicated system. So we want to keep this simple and manageable. We need to be able to stay on top of it. So you don't need 5 accounts. You don't need to be transferring money around every day. Usually practice owners are too busy for that and it ends up in some sort of cash flow disaster. So I like 3 accounts and I like you to transfer money there just once a month is how we structure things. So I want them to have an operating account and that's where everything's coming in and everything's going out, right? That's how all of our operating expenses are coming out of there. And then a tax reserve, and that's exactly what it sounds like. I want you saving tax money for taxes every single month based on your net profit and what your tax advisor has told you is a good percentage allocation for that. And we want to do that just once a month. Look at last month's numbers. What was net income? Okay, let's move that over once a month and set it and forget it. That way, at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, however often you're paying in, you've already got the money. You don't have to think about it. We're not having to take it out. And I do want that tax account separate from your other savings because there is an emotional attachment that comes with it when it's bundled in with your other savings. If it's in its own separate account, you don't even think of it as yours. It's not a concern. And then the last account is your cash reserves account. And that account is really important for relieving that financial pressure. Because if we've got some
Mhm.
extra cushion there, we're able to confidently invest in the business and scale without worrying about having a slow month and not being able to make payroll. So we want to have a nice cash reserve in there. And again, like 10% of gross revenues is a good minimum. And I like to use percentages of revenue. You can also say like, okay, I want 3 months worth of operating expenses as a minimum. They usually one or the other numbers come out very similarly. So it's just whatever works in your mind. I like to say like at least 10% of your last 12 months of gross revenue. And that will really serve as that safety net so that you can confidently invest in hiring or maybe expanding to a new location, whatever it is, and know that, okay, if we have a slow month or something happens, we've got it, no problem.
How do you separate a lifestyle spending from business reinvestment so the owner gets paid well without starving the practice?
I like, most are S corps at this point. So if they're an S corp, they're taking a regular salary, and that needs to be reasonable according to the IRS, which is a super gray area. But basically, I tell my practice owners, it's what you would pay somebody else to do the same job. So if you have
Mhm.
managerial duties, you need to take that into account. All of that. So we have our regular, consistent salary that we're bringing in, and then I like owner's distribution, so that extra money that you get from as a benefit of being the owner of a practice, you went out, you did all this hard work to build this thing. The benefit of that is, and that owner distribution on top. And I like that to be on a quarterly cadence because, again, that 13 weeks, that 3 month period of time gives you enough time to see if the money's actually extra, right? So then we know
Mm.
we don't need that. We don't need that in the practice to support it. We can go ahead and take that extra quarterly distribution as like a little bonus. And then that's what we can do with, when we want to build our lifestyle. Or I really encourage you to invest in a retirement plan. We're maxing out those tax sheltered retirement plans, all of that. But at the same time, we want to not stifle our growth either. So it's a balance of, okay, that's what we're looking at annually. What are our plans for the year and how much cash flow are we going to need to generate to make those happen? And we know that in advance. So we're not taking any extra cash out of the business that we're going to need. We already know what those numbers are and we'll have those goals set.
Now, I'm just curious, is there ever a time when it's okay to touch the taxes account
If you get to the end of the
without
year,
without it being tax season?
yeah. So like, let's say you get to the end of the year. I always encourage you to wait till the end of the year because even if you're making quarterly deposits, this year might not look like last year. So if you get to the end of the year and your tax advisor gives you your number and it's much less and you've got a bunch of extra money sitting there, great. That's a bonus for you. Yes, absolutely. Take it out then. But at least you have that sitting in your bank account accruing interest versus overpaying the IRS and then they're making money on your money.
That's great. Now, what does a complete financial operating system look like inside a high-performing aesthetic practice before they open a second location or even expand their services?
Yeah, so they really need a proven business model from all aspects, your operations, your finance, and your marketing, right? And I like to compare this to a recipe. So if I'm going to a family party, I have a signature dish that I always make, and I've made it 100 times. I know it works. For me, it's cheesy potatoes. My nieces love them. I know they're going to be a hit. What I'm not going to do is try a batch of cookies at home. Like I find this Pinterest recipe, I make a small batch of cookies. They're terrible. I'm not going to double down on that. I'm not going to then double my batch of cookies and then take them to a family reunion. And if there's anything, your family's anything like my family, you're going to get razzed over that, right? So that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that our recipe is perfected before we double down. So that
Mhm.
from a financial perspective, I'm going to speak to the financial side of that, but also
Yes.
operationally, you need to have systems and protocols in place for your providers that you are consistent, repeatable, right? Everything's got to be repeatable. And the same with your marketing. Your marketing needs to be working, and we want to be able to repeat exactly what we're doing. And then from the financial side of that, what that looks like is making sure that we've got a profitable business model. First of all, are we making a profit at that
Mhm.
first location? Are we hitting our margins? Do we have a good pricing system in place? We know how to price things and how to get those margins. And then we want to make sure, of course, that we've got enough cash. Again, I can't talk enough about cash because if you're struggling with cash flow in the first practice, you're going to be really struggling once you open a second one. That really opens you up to a cash flow crisis generally. So we want to make sure
Mhm.
all of that's going well, but then we want to have our everyday systems in place. Do we have that 13-week decision-making tool in place? Like we're able to make confident, data-informed decisions. That's the key. So on a weekly basis. And then do we have our scorecards in place, right? That we can then take, we know how to manage our employees with them, we know how to manage our practice with them. We have those benchmarks then, because there are always industry benchmarks, but then there are our benchmarks. So let's say your average
Mm.
invoice value for the med spa industry is $500, but yours is 700. Well, then we've got that benchmark from our first location to use in the second location. We already know what those numbers should be. So we want to have those scorecards set up in place, the forecasting, and then most everybody has bookkeeping and financial statements. Like usually at this point, people have hired a bookkeeper, and that's great. But what they're missing is that fractional CFO piece. So the things that we set up are the forecasting, the planning, the future focused accounting. All of that needs to be in place. And whether that's something you handle yourself or you hire somebody like me to do, it is so important to have that structure in place. And that's an experienced practice owner that's making multi-millions in revenues, or a brand new practice owner. They need to have that future focused accounting and those systems and processes in place, start to finish.
Is it possible for you to give us your worst example that you have actually seen of
Gosh.
a med spa and
Yeah,
going
the
through?
worst ones are the ones I can't help. They've gotten in too deep, and I will just warn everybody. I don't know if you've heard of an MCA, but it's basically a merchant cash advance, and it's the equivalent of a business payday loan. And they've really infiltrated the med spa industry, and it's easy money, right? They're reaching out to them. They're reaching out to practice centers and saying, "Hey, do you want financing? Here you go." But they're not truly loans, so they don't have to follow traditional lending practices. And so they are really just unsavory, really high interest. They're not even technically interest rates, but really high financing fees associated with them. So what will happen is a practice owner gets in a crunch, and then they see this easy money coming. So they're like, yeah, give me that MCA, give me that cash advance. And then they have this gigantic automatic draft coming out of their bank account every week, because that's what they'll do. And then next week rolls around and they have to start making these payments. And then they're even in a worse situation. So then they reach out to somebody else and they get another one. And so I've seen where their full balance sheet, the liability section is just a bunch of merchant cash advances. And that's a tight spot to get in. And once you get in that cycle of borrowing Peter to pay Paul, basically is what it is, that's so hard for me to get you out of. I can't do it at that point. Once you've done multiple merchant cash advances, it becomes, you have to basically at that point find a bank that's willing to refinance all of that. Is your only way out.
Right. Let's hope that our listeners do not get into
Yeah, so
that
that's my
predicament.
PSA. Do not do a merchant cash advance. There are so much better loans you get. They're harder to get. You've got to go have a relationship with your banker, but do that versus taking the easy money. If somebody's seeking you out trying to lend you money, it's usually the first indication it's a bad deal.
Now, for our listeners tuned in, they have an idea of like, kind of the ratios that they should be looking for when it comes to cash flow. But if they're not hitting those numbers and they are more, going towards a bit of a downward spiral, what would you tell them? What is the first step that they can take to the course?
Yeah, first of all, I will say don't be discouraged, because those percentages and the ratios that I've thrown out there are goals, right? Every client that comes to me, they aren't there yet. We're working towards that. That's our goal. So don't be discouraged. But if you are in that negative spiral, your revenues are dropping, I want you to get to the bottom of that. Why are your revenues dropping? Is it a marketing problem? Is it an operational problem? Do you have a performance problem? Are you getting bad patient outcomes? We need to get to the bottom of what's causing that first
Mhm.
before we worry about anything else. Because at that point, if you keep down, I can show you how to manage your cash flow on a weekly basis, and that is one of the first things I would do, because then you're going to make better decisions and minimize the trouble that you're getting in. But at the end of the day, we have to fix that underlying problem of why that revenue is decreasing. And maybe that's operational, maybe it's marketing, but you got to get to the bottom of it fast. And that's why it's so important to look at your numbers on a weekly basis versus waiting till the end of the month, or worse, the end of the quarter or the end of the year. Weekly, we are looking at everything and making sure we're on the up and up. And if we're not, what do we need to do to course correct?
So, Chelsea, we are here at the end of the podcast. I would love for you to give our listeners one last key takeaway, perhaps the golden nugget of our conversation.
The golden nugget is planning is key. Planning out your cash flow. You want to know how every decision you make is going to affect cash flow, and that's going to be your your North Star.
That was a powerful look at the financial reality behind growth with Chelsea Zainea. If you've been struggling with strong revenue but inconsistent profitability, we hope that this conversation gave you the framework to rethink how you're making decisions inside your business. Mastering your financial infrastructure isn't just about clean books, it's the ultimate driver of sustainable, confident growth. If Chelsea's approach to financial strategy resonated with you, I highly recommend connecting with her and exploring her work where she acts as a strategic financial partner for owners who are ready to scale without the guesswork. Chelsea, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so they can find me at Instagram at Chelsea Zainea. We also have YouTube, and that's Peak Financial Wellness.
Amazing. And before we wrap up, one final reminder from our sponsor, Echo Marketing. If you want a clear plan for attracting more high value patients, they're offering Business of Aesthetic listeners a complimentary marketing strategy session. Their team will review your current online presence, identify missed growth opportunities, and give you a tailored action plan for your practice. You can reserve your session at businessofesthetics.org/MSM. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Business of Aesthetics, that's one word, .org/MSM. I'm Don Adeesha, Business of Aesthetics podcast. Thanks for listening. Keep on leading.